Hey guys, welcome back to the BuzWeaver channel, and we have some top stories today, of course, as these things are breaking. As you know, last night, Russia invaded Ukraine, and of course, we have been asking ourselves this very question: should that happen, what would China, maybe North Korea, and even Iran's response be? So, from Reuters, China rejects calling Russia move invasion, urges citizens in Ukraine to stay home. China rejected calling Russia's moves on Ukraine an invasion and urged all sides to exercise restraint on Thursday, even as it advised its citizens there to stay home. Ukrainian forces battled Russian invaders on three sides on Thursday after Moscow mounted an assault on Ukraine by land, sea, and air, and the biggest attack on a European state since World War II. Now, if you haven't already, below this video, you can find the various social media sites that I belong to. And on those sites, I have been mentioning that I have been watching documentaries on World War I and World War II, and how interesting the events that led up to both of those wars are very similar to what we see with Russia and potentially China, and how this could potentially escalate. Because for the most part, most people thought that this wasn't going to happen. However, it did happen, so we have to consider additional possibilities. So from AP, China calls for talks on Ukraine, okays Russian wheat imports. China called Thursday for talks to resolve the Ukrainian crisis and avoided criticizing President Vladimir Putin's attack, while in a step that could blunt the impact of Western sanctions. Beijing also approved imports of Russian wheat. So it's difficult to say if Russia and China had already made arrangements, because despite the fact that Joe Biden is saying that they're going to have even more economic sanctions or harder sanctions on Russia or NATO or other nations in the world, Russia has had 8 years to prepare for this. And as we have talked about here on the channel many times, about different cultures, philosophies, ideologies, and worldviews, and how they are not like the United States. When we talk about Asia or even Russia, their culture is different from ours. But because the left and others like to look at everything through a Western lens, they fail to realize that perhaps when President Trump was reacting the way he did when he was talking with Kim Jong-un or with Vladimir Putin, he was relating to them on their cultural level. And this is why they thought he was behaving prudish or unusual or absurd or like an oaf. But the thing is, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly how to speak to these individual people because he's had experience. And of course, the left doesn't, well, the left's interpretation of everything is through their own lens, whether it's Democrats, whether it's progressives, whether it's cancel culture, particularly cancel culture, wokeness, and the outrage mobs, who have a very tiny lens and very little, if any, cultural knowledge overall. But suffices to say, Russia has been preparing for this. They're not concerned about these particular sanctions because they've had 8 years to get ready for whatever the United States or NATO could levy against them. So from Bloomberg, China refuses to condemn Russian attack, deflects blame to U.S. So now you're starting to see a pattern here of China not condemning Russia in any way. As a matter of fact, they are ready to help Russia. So again, like I said, having watched a lot of the World War I and World War II, or refreshing my knowledge on these particular conflicts, we're seeing very similar strategizing, very similar chess pieces being moved in a particular direction. So we have here from Bloomberg, China refused to condemn Russia's attack on Ukraine, instead urging restraint by all parties and repeating criticism that the U.S. was to blame for hyping the prospect of war in Eastern Europe in recent days. Now, I would have to argue and say, as we have said here, that what was going on with Ukraine and with Russia was a great distraction from all the burdens and failures that are happening here in the United States as a result of Joe Biden, or I should say more specifically, the establishment-appointed surrogate vote-by-mail President Joe Biden, who is basically just an empty suit and a shadow. And our adversaries know this. Russia knows this. China knows this. So this is the best time for them to act right now, while we have a feckless, ineffectual president who all he can say is sanctions, 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 not realizing, or perhaps doesn't listen to his advisors, who may know a little something about culture, that the sanctions were something that Vladimir Putin would have considered. I mean, Vladimir Putin is not exercising his ability to go into Ukraine on a whim. So Foreign Minister spokeswoman Huai Chongying repeatedly sidestepped questions during a tense news briefing Thursday about whether Beijing considered Moscow's military incursion into Ukraine territory an invasion. Hua said that China didn't wish to see what happened in Ukraine, didn't wish to see what happened in Ukraine, adding that the sovereignty and territory integrity of all countries must be protected. So very interesting how she kind of sidestepped it, but this is very indicative of China. I'm not sure what the particular wrangling was there, because the media is a propaganda apparatus, so nothing is going to go out to the general Chinese public without, of course, it being scrutinized and gone through filters and whatever else the Chinese CCP wants people to hear. So, I didn't really go into listening to what she had to say. She was speaking Chinese, of course, there with translation. But again, we're seeing a pattern where China is simply not condemning the attacks, and I've not seen Joe Biden talk a lot about it. In today's briefing with Joe Biden, I didn't see that anyone had asked him about it, or if he did, he kind of said something to the effect of they're looking into it or they're considering it or whatever else. So from the Financial Times, China ready to soften economic blow to Russia from Ukraine sanctions. Beijing banks financial support from Moscow could be influential in shaping direction of conflict. So China is ready to throw Russia an economic lifeline as Vladimir Putin's ties with the West deteriorate and Moscow is hit by snowballing sanctions over the crisis in Ukraine. Now, as we have mentioned, the West is always looking at things, not all the West, I can't speak for everybody, but for the most part, everyone tries to look at the world through their own cultural lens. And it's important that I emphasize this because we've talked about this on the channel. When it comes to Asia, when it comes to Europe, when it comes to Russia, or most other countries, they do have a different philosophy, ideology, and worldview than the United States. So Russia has had 8 years to prepare for this. So it looks like they had some sort of coordination with China, because now China is going to come in and help them out. And that could be just enough to at least keep Moscow afloat. Maybe not support the entirety of a war to help Russia, but at least it'll get them through whatever sanctions the United States or even Europe can place on them. So again, the idea that the left and the Democrats and even Biden think that sanctions are going to be some one-stop-all huge sledgehammer is a very, very narrow Western perspective, because they just don't have the same level of focus on materialism, on that type of cultural, financial type structure of what we perceive to be success or power or capability. Now, granted, money is a tool that most everyone needs to be able to accomplish certain things, particularly to bolster your economy. But suffice it to say, the Asians and the Europeans are different from America. We view things and see things differently. So now we have China, who, if you think about this, just as a side scenario, Taiwan generates most of the electronic components like semiconductors and chips and everything that we use. I waited 6 weeks to get the computer that I'm doing this video on. I ordered it, and of course, because of the pandemic, as it were, and or the slowdown, not to mention the fact that we have the transportation bottleneck, so we'll also maybe be keeping an eye on the trucker convoy, but a lot of that may have had a little bit of its bluster blown away because, of course, with all this going on here, with Russia and whatnot. But suffice it to say, it's going to be very interesting to see, because China looks like it's prepared to help out Russia in whatever way it can. And of course, if China ever decides that it wants to validate its ability and capability to go into Beijing, listen to me, I'm so tired, to go into Taiwan, that could be a very serious issue. And China apparently right here, as it says, refuses to condemn Russian attacks. So they are right there alongside the Russians, and it's very similar to me to what I saw in the documentaries of World War I and World War II. I'd welcome your guys' thoughts down there in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. Do you know people that may be affected by this? Do you know people in Ukraine are you from the region? Are you formerly from Russia? Or do you have any contacts or know of individuals that are from these parts? Let me know down in the comments below what you're thinking. What China might do. What do you think they could possibly engage with? Are we going to see an escalation? So I want to thank all of you guys on Rumble, Odyssey, and BitChute for your guys' continued support and the recent follows and comments. And of course, all of you here on YouTube, you guys have been amazing. Thank you for your guys' continued support. And of course, appearing right there on the screen, that would be the channel icon to subscribe to the channel. If you guys click on that, you can then, of course, subscribe as well as get notifications. That way you know when there's content here on the channel. And I will see you guys in the Friday vlog.